Hey everyone, Boardgame Brody here again with Meeple Mountain. I have a wonderful looking prototype copy of Chai Tea for Two to show you. It's a pick up and deliver dice as worker placement 2-player only game by Steeped Games. Chai Tea for Two is Steeped Games' second game coming out, all which deal with tea. Now, as I sip my lavender chamomile tea, go ahead and steep something for yourself to drink after this video, as I'm going to tell you 5 things that you need to know about this game. Number 1, the theme. Chai Tea for Two is not just a simplified version of the other game, Chai. This is its own game with different mechanics and themes, so it's a totally different game. Players will be playing as tea merchants who have some say into when and what tea leaves get plucked to move through the tea-making system, taking time to remove its moisture, drying out the leaves, most likely with heat, moving them into crates or making cakes out of them, and then getting them onto the boats to sail across the ocean, as everyone around the world enjoys tea. This game focuses on yellow tea, green tea, pu'er tea, white tea, oolong tea, and black tea. Number 2, the length of the game. All players will need to decide on how many ships a player needs to complete to trigger the end of the game. For a 25-minute game, it's recommended to set 3 ships for the goal, but for the full and longer version lasting 45 minutes, a 5-ship goal can be set. Number 3, setup. There are a bunch of randomly sized boards that might not make too much sense until you know how to play the game, but these boards are all placed together, making a nice panorama picture together. From left to right, you will place 6 harvest tiles, just like you see, with the green part closest to the board in numerical order, and place the tea assistant meeple at the bottom of those. The tea plantation cards are then shuffled and 5 are placed out in each of these slots here, with the last one being used for the remaining cards of the deck, placing them face up. 3 ship cards are placed out in this section, with the last slot being used for the remainder of its deck, placing those cards face up as well. Each player will have one of the player boards that shows one of the tea plantations for each player. Side A is for the basic game, and Side B is for the advanced game. In this video, I'm going to mostly focus on the basic game. Each player will take 7 dice of a chosen color. A random tea merchant card is dealt out to each player, listing either an in-game goal on side A or an ability that can be used once a round on side B. The tea tins are opened for all to use during the game and are placed out to form a supply. Each player will then roll a die, and the player with the highest value gets the first player coin and will go first in the game. Now that the game's set up, we'll go to number 4, how to play the game. The game is played with 4 phases per round, and rounds occur over and over again until a player hits the ship goal that they agreed upon at the beginning of the game. The first phase starts with the tea assistant meeple. That first player will get to choose to move that tea assistant 1 to 3 tiles clockwise. This choice will first determine what 2 types of tea tokens both players will collect, but also the number listed on the chosen tile will determine how many extra actions each player can take. These extra actions are used to either take extra tea tokens unique to each other, or using the action as a movement of any one of the tokens on a player's board. All new tea tokens, when acquired, will start at the bottom of a player's board and will need to travel up to the top to be loaded onto ships. When players use their actions to move tokens on the board, they will need to follow the icons that match each type of tea, because each type of tea moves differently on the board than another. After collecting and using all actions, the harvest tile is flipped over and placed on the other side of the board on the furthest slot available clockwise. Later, the tea assistant will move around the entire board, with whoever's the first player choosing to move it 1 to 3 places, and if the tea assistant is on this side of the board, then the chosen tile will be flipped and placed on the other side in the furthest available slot, again going clockwise. Anyways, this step will supply players with some tea tokens and potentially some movement of tokens on their boards, which you will soon learn is a big part of the game. Next, both players will roll all of their dice. This phase is the worker placement phase, where players take turns assigning their dice to certain places on the board. Let's start on this side of the board, starting with this harvest board, and then going across. Players can place one of their dice of any value on this location to gain any tea token, placing it on the bottom of their player board. This is the market board. Players can place a die with a value equal to or greater than what's listed on that board. that player will gain that plantation card, giving them a benefit and or scoring additional points. Each card will need to be placed in a slot next to that player's personal board. Cards that have a certain type of tea listed on both the right and the left of that card will help that type of tea move up on the player board when that type of tea token lands on the same level or the same row that it is placed on. These cards make moving up on the board more efficient, and players might want to focus on getting those certain teas up on their board if they have these abilities and they can do it quicker. Some of these cards will also list if they're worth any points at the end of the game, or it might have a symbol showing that when it moves the T tokens up, it will then be flipped over and can't be used again until the player takes the action to flip it back over. There is a big variety of these cards, and they will all focus on different teas. Some even move a certain tea up 2 spaces when it shows 2 of the same teas, or it can move 2 different types of teas. Oxidation or fermentation cards will change one type of tea into another, and then move it up 1 space. Crate cards will help gain points if those crates get what they have listed on them. Whenever a tea token of the matching type are in the same level of that card, then they are moved onto that card and will score points at the end of the game. Blooming tea cards will give players points depending on how many they collect throughout the game. Points are awarded matching the chart shown on those cards. All of these cards are supposed to give you extra actions to help you achieve your strategy, either gaining extra potential points or moving your tea up to the dock quicker. Also, when placing a value 6 die on its spot, you will be able to take the top 3 cards, choose one of them, and place the other 2 on the top in any order that you would like. This is the Palace board. When placing any value of die on these spaces, you will be able to take its action. This section lets you move one of your plantation cards to an open slot, possibly taking advantage of it by activating it right then and there. This section lets you swap any 2 existing plantation cards with each other, most likely activating at least one of them. This space lets you become the first player making decisions with the tea assistant and also going first with your worker dice. This last space lets you flip over any of your face-down cards that you previously used. Over here we have the harbor board. Here you will be choosing ships that will load certain teas away from the top of your board, and you will score the number of points listed on that ship card. On your player board you will have 3 slots to hold up to 3 ships at a time. To claim ships, you will need to place 2 to 4 dice that have sequential numbers. At any point, the other player can also place better dice on the card, kicking you off. To do that, that player will need to either use more dice than you did, or they will need to have a higher value if using the same number of dice. After they kick you off, you can always place another one of your dice onto your run and battle each other for certain ships. Now, all the previous actions I've talked about happen immediately when you take that action, where this one is a little bit different. When you place your dice on this section, you won't be able to take the ship until the end of the round. Also, if the player places dice on the last spot that contains the deck of cards, then they can, when it's time to claim, take the top 3 cards, choose one, and place the other 2 back on top in any order. When these ships are waiting in the docks, whenever your tokens reach the top of the board, they will automatically get placed onto the matching ship. Whenever a ship card is fulfilled, it will set sail automatically, and that player will return the T tokens into the supply and place that card to the side of their area to score the points at the end of the game. The last board that you can visit is the production board. This location will give movement actions to the player who wins each row. Players will need to place 2 to 4 dice with matching values. Players can take the better slot by moving the other player down when either placing more dice than the other player or the same number of dice with a higher value. Whoever has the best group will gain 5 movement, second best will gain 3, and third will gain 2. And this board, just like the harbor board, doesn't give immediate actions, as whoever has the best dice there at the end of the round will be able to win those movement actions. Players will take turns using their dice to take these actions, and after all players have used all of their dice, both players will take any ship cards that they still have dice on, adding those ships to the top of their boards, and moving any tokens onto them. Then players with dice on the production board will then be awarded their movement actions, moving their T tokens however they would like at that time. The next round will begin, again, with the tea assistant moving 1 to 3 steps, players rolling and placing their dice, and then fulfilling the dice on ship cards and production board. The rounds occur over and over again until a player triggers the ship goal. Players will finish that round and then they will count up their points. Points are awarded by completed ship cards, by plantation cards next to the player's board, and by points from their tea merchant card. Whoever has the most points wins the game. Number 5. My thoughts on the game. Overall, the game is about picking up the best tea tokens to get them from the bottom of your board to the top to be placed in a ship. Everything else in the game is going to help you do that, or give you a small amount of extra points by fulfilling one of the smaller objectives. The game gives you a lot of different options to go about doing that one job, moving your tea tokens from the bottom to the top of the board. And to do that the best way, those plantation cards can be a huge part of your strategy, but they also can be purchased and barely be used at all. So know that you can always go after those blooming cards, which will block those slots on the side of your board, but they will grant you extra points at the end of the game. Same with those crate cards as well, giving you some extra points at the end of the game. Or you can try a different strategy and possibly investing in those movement cards at the beginning of the game. Doing this might make those cards work harder throughout the game to be more worthwhile, knowing that in the game, movement becomes very important, and if you need to pick up a card and help you move those tokens better, even if it's just once, it might just be worth it. Since movement is very important, it makes the production board very competitive. Players will want to win as much movement as they can, as it's one of the hardest things to do with all the steps that are required on the board to go up to the top, and with multiple tea tokens needing to be moved. Now, the one thing I wish there was a way in the game for players to manipulate their dice somehow so that they could change the results to then fight for better positions. The fact that your roll determines a lot of what actions you can take, and those rolls are determined by luck, makes it hard to strategically plan in the game. So I would have hoped to have seen maybe like a space on the palace board where you can spend a die to change the value on another, or potential plantation cards granting you within an extra ability to be able to do that. And again, you are rolling 7 dice, so you do have a lot of dice to kind of play with. Now, since this is a 2-player only game, the time that the game requires to play is perfect. Turns don't take long, there is interaction between players as you claim certain slots on the board before another player does. The rulebook has all the information available to learn the game, but felt like it could maybe be organized in a better way so that it would be easier to find the answer to a question when playing the game. But it's all in there. The best thing about the game is the amazing components. The T10s just adds to the theme, and the components just make the game better. I was so blown away by how great the components were that it made the game for me more satisfying. As I love just taking a tea token out of one of the 10s to place on my board, and then strategically getting it to the dock using the fewest actions as possible, and making sure the tokens I got to the dock could be then shipped off on a ship. But not just any ship. I wanted to plan for those high point ships that want specific tea types. But I also had to make sure that I got the ship that I wanted, as my competition might also be able to use their dice to take my ship from me. As I played the game, I found myself looking over at the other players' dice to see what they could do, and it helped me to know how I need to use my dice better to get what I want, especially if I didn't get a good roll, or a roll that would let me compete with what I wanted to do. But knowing what my opponent has and what I had made me feel a little safer using my weaker dice for some of the actions and saving my higher dice for some others. Ultimately, this is a good 2-player game that I'll be playing with my wife. The theme, the components, and the fast gameplay will cause this game to frequently visit the game table. So now that your tea is done steeping, take a sip and ask yourself if the things I've mentioned makes you excited about this game. Chai Tea for Two is the best 2-player tea game out there by Steeped Games. Again, this is Boardgame Brody. I hope you enjoyed this video. Stick around and check out some other board game reviews to see what you might want to get to the table.